Readings of Almighty God's Words. Exposing Antichrists.
Item 10. They despise the truth, brazenly flout principles, and ignore the arrangements of God's house. Part 3. 2. Despising the flesh in which God is incarnate. The topic of the last fellowship was the 10th manifestation of Antichrists, despising the truth, brazenly flouting principles, and ignoring the arrangements of God's house. This item is further divided into 3 more sections for detailed fellowship. The first section is despising God's identity and essence. The second is despising the flesh in which God is incarnate. And the third is despising the words of God. These 3 sections are used to dissect the 10th item of the various manifestations of Antichrists. The first section has been fellowshipped, and for the second section, despising the flesh in which God is incarnate, it is divided into 4 parts for fellowship. What are these 4 parts?
First, fawning, flattery, and fair-sounding words. Second, scrutiny and analysis, along with curiosity. Third, how they treat Christ depends on their mood. And fourth, merely listening to that which Christ says, but neither obeying nor submitting.
The first 2 parts were fellowshipped last time. This time, we shall fellowship the third part. C. How they treat Christ depends on their mood. The third part is how they treat Christ depends on their mood. This simple phrase makes evident the various manifestations of Antichrists. In your impression, or from what you have seen and experienced, shouldn't there be some examples regarding this part? Some people say, I have never had contact with Christ. I've only heard his sermons. I have no real experience with this manifestation, nor have I seen others exhibit it in reality. For those who have real experience with this part, do you have any feelings or understandings that correspond with it? None? Then we really need to have an in-depth fellowship, don't we? On the surface, this part involves various attitudes and manifestations when people come into contact with Christ. In fact, from this part, one can not only see the various manifestations and attitudes of people toward the flesh in which God is incarnate, but also discern in people's treatment of the flesh in which God is incarnate their true attitudes and manifestations toward God. That is, from this, it is evident with what attitude people treat God himself, who has God's identity and essence, and whether they have a God-fearing heart, genuine faith, and true submission. When facing various situations, people's attitudes toward Christ reveal their attitudes toward the God they believe in. In treating this ordinary person Christ, whether you have any notions, genuine faith, or true submission indicates whether you have genuine faith and true submission toward the God you believe in, God himself. In people's treatment of the God in heaven, their attitudes, views, and what they truly think, they are quite vague, not revealing their real attitudes toward God. However, when people actually encounter God and see the tangible flesh and blood body in which God is incarnate, their true attitudes toward God become completely revealed. The words people speak, the thoughts in their minds, the viewpoints they establish and hold in their hearts, and even their thoughts and attitudes toward Christ in their hearts are in fact various manifestations of how they treat God. Since the God in heaven is invisible and intangible, for how people think of him, how they treat him, how they define him, and whether they are submissive, there is actually no standard in people to measure whether their manifestations are correct or conform to the truth. But when God becomes incarnate as Christ, all this changes. There becomes a standard to measure all these manifestations and attitudes of people toward God, making evident people's true attitudes toward God. Often, people think they have great faith in God and genuine belief, feeling that God is great, supreme, and lovable. But are these a reflection of their true stature, or merely a mood? It's hard to determine. When people can't see God, no matter how well-intentioned they are in treating him, their treatment of him is always adulterated with vagueness, hollowness, and impracticality, always fraught with some empty imaginings. When people actually see and come into contact with God, the extent of their faith in God, their level of submission to God, and whether they have true love for God become fully revealed. Therefore, when God becomes incarnate, especially when he becomes a person that is as ordinary as one can possibly be, for all people, this flesh, this ordinary person, becomes a trial for everyone, and also reveals each person's faith and true stature. You may have been able to follow God when you first acknowledged his existence, but when you accept God incarnate, seeing God become an ordinary person, your mind becomes filled with notions. At this time, the Christ you believe in, this ordinary person, becomes the greatest challenge for your belief. Today then, let's fellowship the impact that this ordinary person, the flesh in which God is incarnate, Christ, has on people, and the real manifestations people exhibit toward this ordinary person Christ, which reveal their various true attitudes and viewpoints toward God. The main content of the third part is that people treat Christ depending on their mood. What exactly this mood refers to is the center, the focus of today's fellowship. Of course, this mood is just a metonym, a generalization. It is not a mood. Behind it lurk various notions and imaginings of people, as well as all sorts of their corrupt dispositions, even their satanic nature essence. When one does not face any obstacles in doing their duties in God's house, there isn't anything that affects their mood, and everything goes smoothly. They can often pray before God and live a very regular life, full of joy and peace. The environment around them is also smooth. Most of the brothers and sisters get along with each other. God often guides them in their performance of duties and in learning about certain technical fields, providing enlightenment and illumination, and the principles of practice are relatively clear. Everything is so normal and goes so smoothly. At this time, people feel they have great faith in God, feel particularly close to God in their hearts, can often come before God to pray and confide, feel intimately connected with God, and find God especially lovable. Their mood at this time is very good, they often live in peace and joy, actively speaking at gatherings, and they are able to pray, read God's words, and learn hymns regularly every day. When all is going so well and smoothly, people continuously thank God in their hearts, silently pray to God, and resolve to expend themselves for God for their whole lives, offer everything they have, and withstand hardships and pay the price to fulfill their duties well. They feel that God is so great, so lovable, and they have the resolve and willingness to offer themselves to God, dedicating their entire lives to Him. Isn't this condition particularly proactive and positive? From here, it seems we can see people's loyalty, their love for God, and the sacrifices they make. Everything appears so wonderful, peaceful, and smooth. From all these manifestations, it seems that people are just actively trying on their part, cooperating with God's work and His requirements, without anything unfavorable. Thus, in their hearts, they continuously thank God, thank the God in heaven, and thank Christ on earth, filled with endless love and reverence for Christ. Whenever they sing the words, "this insignificant person," in hymns, they feel immensely moved, thinking, "It truly is this insignificant person who saved me, who gave me this opportunity, allowing me today to do my duty as a created being in God's house." Even some people directly pray, "O practical God, God incarnate, Christ, I thank you, I praise you, for you have given me all these blessings. You have graced me. You are the God in my heart. You are the Creator. You are the one I wish to follow. I am willing to expend myself for you for my whole life." All these scenes are so peaceful, so beautiful, and seem so perfectly harmonious, as if being saved is so easy and effortless. But can this harmony and peace really last forever? Can it remain unchanged? It's not that simple. 1. Their behavior when confronted with being pruned. In the process of doing their duties, it is inevitable for people to reveal their corrupt dispositions, to grumble in the circumstances they encounter, to have their own views, and even more so, to do things willfully and rashly. In such situations, people inevitably are confronted with being pruned. When confronted with being pruned, does a person who is full of enthusiasm, who is filled with imaginings and notions about God, really have the stature to face all this, to genuinely experience all this, and to successfully navigate such situations? This raises a question, and here lies the problem. When people feel everything is so wonderful, when they feel God is so lovable, that God loves people so much, that His love is so great and so real, and then they are faced with being pruned, with being revealed, those who do not understand the truth often feel bewildered and confused, fearful and afraid. They suddenly feel like they have fallen into darkness, unable to see the path ahead, not knowing how to face the current situation. When they come before God, they seek the same feelings they had before, praying with the same mood, thoughts, viewpoints, and attitude as before. But then they feel they can't sense God anymore. When they feel they can't sense God, they start thinking, "Does God not want me anymore? Does God spurn me? Could it be that because of my corrupt disposition, God doesn't like me anymore? Is God going to eliminate me? If so, aren't I done for? What's the point of my existence now? What's the point of believing in God? I may as well not believe. If I didn't believe, maybe I could have a good job now, a harmonious family, a bright future. Believing in God until now hasn't brought me anything. But if I truly stop believing, wouldn't that mean all my previous efforts were wasted? That all my previous expenditures and sacrifices were in vain? Upon these reflections, they suddenly feel desolate and uncomfortable all over, thinking, the God in heaven is so distant, and this God on earth, apart from fellowshipping and providing the truth, what else can he help me with? What else can he give me? He seems so insignificant and so inconsiderate. What's the big deal with having a bit of a corrupt disposition? If this were handled in a human way, God would overlook people having a bit of a corrupt disposition. He would handle it with leniency and not nitpick people's minor faults. Why is God pruning and disciplining me like this, and even ignoring me over such a small matter? It's no big deal to reveal such a corrupt disposition in this kind of situation, but God actually detests me. Does he really love people or not? Where is his love revealed? How exactly does he love people? Anyway, at this moment, I can no longer feel God's love. When they can't feel God's love, they instantly feel very distant from the God in heaven, and even more distant from this Christ on earth, this ordinary person. When feeling this desolation in their heart, they pray repeatedly and comfort themselves again and again. Don't be afraid. Put your hope in the God in heaven. God is my shield. God is my strength. God still loves people. At this moment, where is the God they speak of? In heaven, among all things, that God is the one who truly loves people, the God whom people look up to and adore, who can be their shield, their ever-present help, and can comfort their hearts. He is the reliance for their spirit, heart, and flesh. But given what this God on earth is capable of doing, there's now no longer any reliance in people's hearts. Their attitude changes. In what situation does it change? When they are confronted with being pruned and revealed, and encounter setbacks, their true faith is revealed. Once people are confronted with being pruned, their so-called true faith immediately finds reliance on the vague God in heaven. As for the visible God on earth, what is their attitude? The first reaction of people is to reject and let go, to no longer rely on or believe in, but to avoid him, to hide and to distance themselves from him. This is the kind of mood people have. When confronted with being pruned, the truth people understand, their so-called true faith, loyalty, love, and submission become so fragile. When all these circumstances change, their attitude toward God incarnate also changes accordingly. Their previous sacrifices, their so-called loyalty, expenditure, and the price they paid, as well as their so-called submission, are revealed at this moment not to be any sort of loyalty or true submission, but merely enthusiasm. And what is mixed in with this enthusiasm? It is adulterated with human feelings, human goodness, and human allegiance. This allegiance can also be understood as hot-headedness, as in, if I follow someone, I must show true brotherly allegiance, be willing to lay down my life for him, exert myself, take a stab for him, offer up everything for him, which is a manifestation of human hot-headedness. Such human manifestations are revealed at this moment. Why are they revealed? It is because, in people's thoughts and viewpoints, they appear to have accepted that this ordinary person is God incarnate, is Christ, is God, and that he possesses God's identity. But looking at their actual stature, the truth they understand, and their knowledge of God, they have not truly accepted this ordinary person, nor have they treated this ordinary person as Christ, as God. When everything is going well, when everything is as one wishes, when people feel that God is blessing, illuminating, leading, and gracing them, and when what people receive from God aligns with their notions and imaginings, they can subjectively accept the ordinary person testified by God as the God of man. However, when all these circumstances change, when God takes away all these things, and when people lack true understanding and do not possess true stature, everything about them is revealed, and what they express is precisely their true attitude toward God. How does this true attitude arise? Where does it originate from? It originates from people's corrupt disposition and their lack of knowledge of God. Why do I say this? What is this corrupt disposition in people?
After being corrupted by Satan, people internally guard against God and form a barrier against him. No matter what God does, they always wonder, is God going to harm me?
Is the relationship between people and God merely a matter of there being a barrier? Is it that simple? It's not just a matter of there being a barrier. It's a problem of two different essences. Humans have corrupt dispositions. Does God have a corrupt disposition?
No.
Then why is there discord between people and God? Why are people hostile toward God? Where does the reason lie? Is it in God or in people?
In people.
For example, if two people have a quarrel and stop speaking to each other, even if they do speak, it'll only be superficial, with a barrier formed in their hearts. How does this barrier come about? It arises because they have different viewpoints that cannot reconcile, and neither is willing to give up their viewpoint, preventing unity. This is how barriers between people are formed. But if we describe the relationship between people and God as merely having a barrier, isn't that a bit of an understatement, not quite hitting the mark? It's true there is a barrier, but if we just use the term barrier to explain the problem of people's corrupt disposition, that would be too mild. This is because after being corrupted by Satan, people have satanic corrupt disposition and essence, and their innate nature is hostile to God. Satan is hostile to God. Does it regard God as God? Does it have faith in or submission toward God? It has neither true faith nor true submission. This is how Satan is. People are the same as Satan. They possess Satan's corrupt disposition and essence, and also lack true faith in and submission toward God. So can we say there's a barrier between people and God due to this lack of true faith and submission? This only indicates that people are hostile to God. When what God does aligns with people's tastes, moods, and needs, satisfies their preferences, and makes everything go smoothly and as desired for them, people then feel that God is very lovable. But is this feeling of God being lovable at such times genuine? This is just people taking advantage, offering a few nice words in return. This is what's known as reaping benefits and then feigning niceness. In such situations, do the words people say reflect a true knowledge of God? Is this knowledge of God real or fake? This knowledge does not conform to the truth, nor to the essence of God. It is not a true knowledge, but an imagining, a notion arising from human feelings and hot-headedness. When this notion is shattered, exposed, and revealed, people feel frustrated. It implies that all they wish to gain has been taken away. Hasn't people's previous perception of God being lovable and good in various ways been criticized and condemned? This is exactly the opposite of what they believed before. Can people accept this fact?
No.
When God gives you nothing, He simply lets you live by His words. Speak and act, do your duty, serve God, get along with others, and so on, all according to His words. When you do live by His words, and you can feel God's painstaking care, and you can genuinely love and submit to God, then the impurities in you are less, and the loveliness and essence of God that you feel are genuine. When people are confronted with discipline and being pruned, they develop notions, complaints, and misunderstandings about God. When these things emerge, people suddenly feel that God is inconsiderate, as if He's not as lovely as they imagined. Everyone says God is lovely, but why can't I feel it? If God is indeed lovely, He should bless and comfort me. When I am about to make a mistake, He should warn me instead of letting me embarrass myself or err. He should do these things before I err, preventing me from making mistakes or taking the wrong path. Such notions and thoughts churn in people's minds when they face adversities. At this time, the way people speak and act becomes less open. When people are confronted with being pruned, when they face adversities, their mood worsens. They start to feel that God does not love them as much or treat them with as much grace, that they are not favored as much. They think to themselves, if God doesn't love me, why should I love Him? I won't love God either. Previously, in their conversations with God, whatever God asked, they answered. They were very active. They always wanted to share more, never running out of things to say, wanting to express and convey everything in their hearts, aspiring to be God's confidant. But when confronted with being pruned, they feel that God is not so lovely anymore, that God doesn't love them as much, and they don't want to love God either. When God asks something, they simply reply briefly and perfunctorily, giving only one-word responses. If God asks, "How well have you been doing your duties recently?" they answer, "All right." Do you have any difficulties? Sometimes. Can you cooperate harmoniously with the brothers and sisters? In their mind, they think, I can't even take care of myself. How can I cooperate harmoniously with others? Do you have any weakness? I'm all right. They become unwilling to talk more, displaying a completely negative, complaining attitude. Their whole being becomes dispirited and despondent, filled with grievances and a sense of being wronged, unwilling to say more than necessary. Why is this? Because their mood is not good now. Their state is relatively despondent, and they are not in the mood to talk to anyone. When asked, "Have you prayed recently?" they reply, "My prayers are still just those same words." Your state hasn't been good recently. Have you sought the truth when confronted with difficulties? I understand everything. I just can't be proactive. You have developed misunderstandings about God. Do you see where your problem lies? What corrupt dispositions are stopping you from coming before God? What is causing you to be so negative that you don't even feel like coming before God to pray? I don't know. What kind of attitude is this?
Negative and confrontational.
Correct. There is not a hint of submission, but rather, they are filled with complaints and grievances. In their spiritual and mental world, they perceive God as similar to a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure as described by humans. Regardless of what people do or how they live, those Buddha or Bodhisattva figures never utter a word, simply submitting themselves to people's manipulations. They believe that God should not prune them, much less harm them. Whatever wrong they do, God should only soothe them, not prune, expose, or reveal them, and certainly not discipline them. They want to believe in God and do their duty according to their own moods and dispositions, doing as they please, thinking that no matter what they do, God should be satisfied, happy, and accepting. However, things do not go as they wish. God does not act in this way. People then think, if he doesn't act as I imagined, is he still God? Is he still worth my investment, expenditure, and sacrifice? If not, then offering my sincere heart would be foolish, wouldn't it? Thus, when the time comes for being pruned, people's initial response is not to listen, from the perspective of a created being, to what God is saying or what his requirements are, nor what the human problems, states, or dispositions God exposes are, nor how man should accept, regard, or submit to these things. Such things are not on people's minds. No matter how God speaks to people, or how he guides them, if his tone or manner of speech is inconsiderate, if their moods, self-esteem, and weakness are not taken into account, then people get notions, and they do not want to treat God as God, nor do they want to be created beings. The biggest problem here is that when God delivers good times, enabling everything to go the way people want it to, they are willing to act as created beings. But when God presents adversity in order to discipline and reveal people, to have them learn a lesson, and to let them understand the truth and know His intention. At these times, people turn their backs on Him at once and no longer desire to be created beings. When a person does not want to be a created being, then, from that perspective and that position, will they be able to submit to God? Will they be able to accept the identity and essence of God? They will not. When the times of good moods, fine states, and enthusiasm, those times when people want to be confidants of God, give way to times when people want to abandon Him in the face of being pruned, of environments laid out by God, what a dramatic change it is. What, exactly, is the truth of this matter? What is it that people should know? Should a person not know what type of attitude they should have toward God as a created being? What are the principles that need to be followed? As a person, a corrupt human being, what perspective and position should one adopt toward everything God gives man and the environments He arranges? What attitude should people adopt toward God's pruning of them? How should they regard it? Should people not ponder such matters? People should reflect on and ponder such things as these. No matter when and no matter how a person treats God, the identity of man does not, in fact, change. People are always created beings. If you are not reconciled to your status as a created being, it means that you are rebellious and far from changing your disposition, far from fearing God and shunning evil. If you are reconciled to your place as a created being, then what sort of attitude should you have toward God?
Unconditional submission.
At the very least, you must be possessed of this one thing: unconditional submission. That means at any given time, what God does is never wrong. It is only people who err. Regardless of the environments that crop up, especially in the face of adversity, and especially when God reveals or exposes people, the first thing one should do is to come before God to reflect on themselves and examine their words and deeds and their corrupt disposition, instead of examining, studying, and judging whether God's words and actions are right or wrong. If you stay in your proper position, you should know exactly what it is you ought to be doing. People have a corrupt disposition and do not understand the truth. This is not such a big problem. But when people have a corrupt disposition and do not understand the truth, yet still do not seek the truth, now they have a big problem. You have a corrupt disposition and do not understand the truth, and you can judge God arbitrarily and approach and interact with Him as your mood, preferences, and emotions dictate. However, if you do not seek and practice the truth, things are not going to be so simple. Not only will you not be able to submit to God, but you could misunderstand and complain about Him, condemn Him, oppose Him, and even scold and reject Him in your heart, saying that He is not righteous, that not everything He does is necessarily right. Is it not dangerous that you may yet give rise to such things? It is very dangerous. Not seeking the truth can cost one their life. And this can happen at any time and at any place. However exuberant your emotions, aspirations, desires, or ideals are at present, and however much you love God in your heart at this moment, It is all temporary. It's just like when a pastor officiates a wedding and asks both parties, "Do you take him to be your husband? In sickness and in health, in disaster, in poverty, and so on, are you willing to spend your life with him?" Both parties, with tears brimming in their eyes and hearts surging with emotion, vow to devote their lives to each other and take lifelong responsibility for one another. What are these solemn vows at that moment? They are merely people's fleeting emotions and wishes. But do both parties truly possess such integrity? Do they truly possess such humanity? That remains an unknown. The truth will be revealed over the next 10, 20, or 30 years. Some couples divorce after 3 to 5 years, some after 10 years, and others, after 30 years, break things off just like that. Where did their initial wishes go? What happened to their solemn vows? They were long cast beyond the hills. What role do these solemn vows play? None at all. They are just wishes, momentary emotions. Emotions and wishes don't determine anything. What is required for a couple to truly spend a lifetime together, to grow old together? Speaking ideally, at the very least, both individuals need to have integrity and upright character. Speaking more concretely, during their lives, they will encounter many things, big and small, good and bad, hardships, setbacks, difficulties, mostly things that are not as desired. This requires both parties to have genuine tolerance, patience, love, consideration, care, and other relatively positive things in humanity to support each other until the end of the road. Without these qualities, relying solely on vows and on the ideals, wishes, and fantasies from the time when they got married, they certainly cannot make it to the end. The same applies to believing in God. If one does not seek the truth, but relies only on a bit of enthusiasm and wish, they definitely cannot stand firm and absolutely cannot follow God to the end.